Onto your headphones and pour your favorite beverage. It's time for the Kickin' or Stickin' Fantasy Football Podcast. Now, fresh off the sidelines, your host, Matt McPeak.
Fantasy freaks and geeks, what's up? Hope everyone is staying healthy out there in these crazy times. This is the XFL recap episode. It's a special episode. We'll be joined by our first guest since the rebranding. Dylan Moran from the On and Off the Field podcast will be joining us. We're going to talk some XFL rules that we think the NFL should adopt. Then I'll finish up the episode highlighting all of the XFL players that I believe deserve a shot in the NFL. But first, let's take a look at how these XFL teams did in the first season of this new renovation of the XFL. A lot of good things came in this league, although they were only able to play 5 games. I hope that it's here to stay because it was a lot of fun. I'll watch football all day, every day, so I'll take football any way I can get it. But let's take a look at these 8 teams and how each team finished. So starting with the Dallas Renegades, they finished 2-3. They were the only team to win every road game and lose every home game. Obviously, Landry Jones, the quarterback there, was one of the biggest names for this league, and he was only able to start, and I think it was 3 games, was it? Yeah, he started in 3. He left the 4th game with an injury. But the running backs on this team really stood out. Cameron Artis-Payne led the league, or no, he was 4th in the league in rushing yards. He was 1st in yards per attempt. Lance Dunbar was 2nd in the league in yards per attempt. So they really fed those running backs. That's running backs among running backs with over 10 rushes. But the real guy that stood out is Donald Parham. He was 1st in almost every single receiving category among tight ends. 307 yards in 5 games, 24 receptions, had 4 touchdowns. 12.8 yards per carry, and he did have a long catch of 65 yards, showing off his speed there. So he's a guy that I think there's going to be at least one NFL team that that's willing to give him a shot. Looking at the DC2 Fenders, finished 2-3. They were the only team to win. Oh, I'm sorry. Looking at the wrong sheet here. They finished 3-2, one of the most inconsistent teams in the league with 2 straight wins, then 2 straight horrible losses, and then a win in Week 5. Really the one guy that stood out to me was Eli Rogers. He caught 19 of 30 targets for 164 yards, averaged 8.6 yards per reception. He was looking like a legit slot receiver for the first 2 weeks of the season, averaged 11 yards per catch on his 11 catches through the first 2 weeks, then only 5.25 yards on his 8 catches in weeks 3 through 5. I'm not sure if he did enough to earn another NFL roster spot, but he definitely stood out amongst a pretty talented wide receiver core there in D.C. Looking to Houston, the best team in the league, finished 5-0. They scored 21 touchdowns, which is the most in the XFL. P.J. Walker was the best quarterback by far, over 1,300 yards, had a 65% completion percentage. He did throw 4 interceptions, but he had 15 touchdowns in 5 games, which is pretty ridiculous. James Butler was another guy on this team that really played well. I thought him and running back turn wide receiver Nick Holley, he played well as well. But really the guy that stood out, Cam Phillips, 44 targets, 31 receptions, a little over 450 yards with 9 freaking touchdowns this guy had in 5 games. That is also ridiculous. Looking at the LA Wildcats, they finished 2-3. They were the only team besides the Roughnecks to score more than 12 touchdowns. They had 18 touchdowns scored. Nelson Spruce was the guy to me, although he only played in, I think it was 3 games. He had 28 targets, 20 receptions, 256 yards, had 2 touchdowns. he definitely showed why he was a guy that bounced around from, I think it was 4 or 5 different teams in the NFL. He definitely showed he's got the ability to get downfield and catch some passes. Looking at the New York Guardians, they finished 3-2 despite scoring the fewest touchdowns in the league. Jake Powell, to me, was the guy that kind of stood out, even though he didn't really do much. He just looked like one of those prototypical second or third string tight ends that you can count on him to help out in the running game and pass protect, and he can run those simple tight end routes, those seams and the little waggles, and he caught he had 12 receptions on 16 targets, not bad at all. So he was the one guy that stood out to me. Looking at the Seattle Dragons, finished 1-4, ended on a 3-game losing streak, tied with the Vipers for the most touchdowns allowed with 15. Honestly, the only guy that stood out to me was Austin Prohl, although he caught 16 of 31 targets, pretty much only caught half of his targets. Not all that great for a slot receiver, but he did catch 3 touchdowns, so maybe that's one thing the NFL can look at. Looking at the St. Louis Battlehawks, finished 3-2, only team from the XFL East with a positive touchdown ratio. They were +3 in the TDs scored to TDs allowed ratio. Jordan Tiamu, 1,000 passing yards, 72% completion percentage. And DeMornay Pearsonell stood out to me, caught 23 of 26 targets for 200 yards, had 2 touchdowns. He finished 8th in the league in receptions, looked like one of the best slot receivers in the league. And then finally, we got the Tampa Bay Vipers. Finished 1-4, dead last in the league. They were the team with the lowest touchdown ratio. They were -4. And Dan Williams did play pretty well. Caught 23 of 38 for 338 yards. He was second in the league in receiving yards and 4th in targets, but I'm just not sure if he did enough to show the NFL that he deserves a spot. So that's kind of a recap of all the teams. I'm now going to drop in this pre-recorded segment that I did with Dylan talking about the XFL rules. So check it out. All right, we are joined here by Dylan Moran from the On and Off the Field podcast, which you can catch on the RTF Sports Network at 3 p.m. Eastern Time Thursdays, and starting next week, catch him live from 7:30 to 8:30 p.m. at rtfsportsnetwork.com. Dylan, welcome to the Kickin' or Stickin' Fantasy Football Podcast. Thank you for coming on. How you doing? What's going on?
Hey, thanks for having me, first off. Appreciate it. I always love just hanging out and chilling and talking some football. And I'm doing fine. I'm just here chilling, rock and roll.
Good stuff, man. So why don't you tell us a little bit about what your show is all about and what we can expect to hear from the On and Off the Field podcast.
Yeah, so it started as an NFL podcast, and then it kind of grew into the XFL as well. When that became a thing, it was a super exciting time period. It's very unfortunate that it's dead right now, but hopefully it'll be back next year. But the off the field portion of On and Off the Field is we discuss charities and foundations that the players run, and just kind of give a shout out for the players of all the good deeds they do.
That's awesome, man. That's really cool. I feel like one thing that professional athletes don't get enough credit for is definitely the charity work that they do, which, in these times with all these arena workers getting laid off and whatnot, it's really cool to see what guys like, Zion Williamson is doing and others that are, helping out those hourly employees that are missing out on some vital funds. So very cool, man. Well, again, thanks for joining us, and let's jump into it. So as we talked earlier, we both are pretty psyched on the XFL rules that they added. I think there's a hell of a lot that the NFL can learn from the XFL, but the one rule that I really liked the most, and I think has the best chance of getting indoctrinated into the NFL, is this new look kickoff. So the XFL's kickoff, to me, is 100 times more entertaining than the NFL's kickoff. More than half of the NFL kickoffs resulted in a touchback last year, and a lot of returns were short of the 25-yard line, which is obviously the touchback marker. Last year in 256 NFL games, there were 7 return touchdowns. It's less than 3% of all the returns. In the 5 weeks of the XFL, on the other hand, we saw 20 games with 2 return touchdowns. So 10% of the returns, the numbers speak for themselves. There was more return. We could have had even more returns, I'm sure, if the season wasn't cut short. Unfortunately, the XFL only really has stats on their top 5 returners from season 1, and obviously with only 5 games to go off, it's a pretty small sample size. But I took kind of a deep dive into these returns. Just to refresh your memory, anybody out there that's not familiar with the XFL's kickoff rules, the return team lines up on their own 30-yard line, while the kicking team lines up on their opponent's 35-yard line, with the kicker back at his own 30. So pretty much everyone except for the kicker and the returner are within 5 yards of each other on the return team's 30 and 35-yard line. From when the ball is kicked, only the kicker and the returner can move. Then once the ball is caught or is on the ground for at least 3 seconds, every other player is free to run, block, and tackle and play football. The league average in yards per kick return in the NFL last year was 22.5 yards. 4 of the top 5 returners in the XFL this past shortened season had an average yards per kick return over 22.5. So the majority of the top XFL returners had a higher average yards per kick return than the average NFL team. The average number of kick returns per 16 games among the top 5 returners in the NFL was 27.2. And if you took those XFL returners and their yards per return and spaced them out over a 16-game season, 2 of the XFL's top 5 returners would have been in the top 3 of the NFL, and 4 of the top 5 XFL returners would have been in the top 6 of the NFL. So clearly these XFL returns, there was more big plays coming from these XFL returns. One other quick little stat. Every one of the top 5 returners from the XFL averaged over 2.5 returns per game, and 2 of them averaged over 3 returns a game. Looking at the NFL on the other side, Steven Sims had the most returns per game in the NFL with 2. So the XFL's kickoff rules yielded more returns. I'm not a doctor, and I haven't seen any of the numbers on the concussions on these kick returns, but I don't remember seeing any guys go down on kick returns with injuries, and I watched all but 2 of the XFL games, so I'm willing to bet that these XFL kick returns were not only safer, but the numbers clearly show that it leads to more returns and more productive returns. Dylan, what did you think of these of the XFL returns? We saw that one pretty exciting return where they kind of ran like a reverse on it, and I was really excited to see how other teams would come up with some other kickoff return plays. But what's your view on this XFL return, and do you think that the NFL would adopt it into their league?
If the NFL doesn't take a hard look at the stats like apparently you have, then they're fools. And this should be a no-brainer. This should be something that is implemented within the next 2 years. If they don't want to do it this year, they want to look at the stats some more, implement it next year. This is too exciting. Like you said, right there at the end, they did the reverse. The Battlehawks did a little flip around.
Yep.
It just creates more excitement for that. And who doesn't love to see a wall of 20 players just collide from being 5 yards away, and it's just a wall of blockers and people trying to tackle the guy. Super exciting to watch. And then it's safer. You never saw a return where a guy's getting his helmet crashed in, no one's getting hit at 30 miles an hour. It's 100% safer. And the reason that I think is the most exciting part of this, and one of the things that the NFL has a major issue with, is almost 0 penalties on kickoffs. Both kickoffs and punts in the NFL, as soon as someone has a good return, all you're doing is looking for a holding flag, a block in the back flag. All right, that's a good return. Where's the penalty? In the XFL, you're only 5 yards away. It's almost impossible to get to the point where you're blocking someone in the back, or there might be a hold here or there. But overall, I'd love to see the stat on penalties, because I do not remember seeing someone getting a good return and it got called back almost never. So this just seems like a no-brainer. It checks all the boxes: excitement, health, everything. It should be implemented almost immediately.
I couldn't agree more, man. Another rule that I think the NFL should totally adopt is this point after touchdown attempts. So 2 years ago, the NFL moved the extra point kick back to the 15-yard line from the 2-yard line, with hopes that it would make an extra point less of a guarantee and more of a challenge for kickers. It was a success to an extent. The extra point percentage went down from 98% to 94.5%. But at the end of the day, it's still the most boring play in football. The XFL wanted to change that and bring another level of strategy into the game and give the fans a more entertaining play after a touchdown. And I don't know about you, but I think they succeeded very much so. From 2015 to 2019, in the NFL, teams had a 49% success rate on goal-to-go plays on 3rd and 4th down from the 2-yard line, which is what the 1-point attempt was, and then the 35% success rate from the 5-yard line and 18% success rate from the 10-yard line. In the XFL's 5-game season, teams had a 41% success rate on the 1-point attempts, 38% from the 2-point attempt, and a 31% rate from the 3-point attempt. So basically, besides the 1-point attempt, the XFL was actually better on these goal-to-go plays from the 5-yard line and from the 10-yard line. The NFL teams already spent a big part of each week's practice on red zone and goal line plays. And if they were to adopt this rule, I'm sure they would spend even more time on those types of plays. NFL running backs and tight ends would absolutely love this rule to come into the NFL. And I'm willing to bet a lot of the fans would love to see it as well. The league has already done pretty much everything they can to increase scoring and to make it an offensive game as much as possible. It just seems like a no-brainer to me. What did you think of these the extra points after touchdown attempts?
Yeah, you kind of took the words right out of my mouth, because the NFL thought they were being slick. They narrowed the goalposts. They pushed back the kicker a little bit, and they're like, "Oh, this will make it so it's not automatic, and people will have to watch the extra point." They
narrowed the goalpost. I didn't even know that.
I think they did that like forever ago, unless it was just experimental. I remember they used to talk about it, but it's still a guy kicking a ball, and if he misses, you're mad. If you make it, you never see a team get excited. Like, if you're sitting at home and your team makes the extra point, are you jumping up and down with joy?
No,
it just doesn't happen
unless it's a game winner. Yeah,
and if it's a game winner, it's like a crazy scenario there, but it's such a small sample size where that would be the case. But with the XFL, your team goes out there, they line up on the 10-yard line. They were down 9 points. They got the 6. We're going to tie it up for 3. It's this exciting. It's a play. It's a football play now. It's an extra play of excitement. Guys running around the field. Quarterback has to make a play. It's just so. Just compare that, another full 22 guys on the field football play, to someone kicking a ball. I mean, it's more exciting, and then it leads to opening up the playbook even more. You see a couple of trick plays to get this done to score the 1, 2, 3 points. You got more personnel in there. It makes it harder on the coaches, makes it harder on the players. It's a win-win-win again. The XFL just did such a good job with rolling this out and coming up with this idea. Just hats off to Oliver Luck on that one.
Yeah, the other cool thing that I noticed, I think it was week 4, once Luis Perez took over as the starting quarterback for the New York Guardians. We saw on the extra point attempts, they would bring in Marquise Williams, I think it was, their second or third string quarterback, to kind of run that zone read on the goal line. So it gave an opportunity to a backup quarterback that we probably wouldn't have seen him on the field if it wasn't for these extra point attempts. So I think there's plenty of teams in the NFL. You know, I think of Taysom Hill with the Saints. You know, they would absolutely love this rule to come into play because that dude is essentially a fullback / tight end / wide receiver / punt rusher. I mean, the dude just does everything. So I think that would be really cool to see him and the rest of the league experiment with these extra point attempts. I don't know why they wouldn't do something like that because you're completely right. And a dude kicking the ball is not all that enjoyable to me. I was going to go through the overtime period. The XFL's overtime was a little different. Unfortunately, we never had the opportunity to see that overtime rule, but I would go back and check it out. It's kind of like a college football's version on steroids of the overtime. But I really wish we could have had the chance to see it, and I really hope the XFL comes around next year so that way we get the chance to see it next year because I think it would have been awesome. But the last rule that I think the NFL should totally add in, it's the comeback period. So this rule is one that I have the least amount of faith in with the NFL adopting, you know, with how much emphasis the league has put on trying to shorten games. I think the last thing they'll do is you know, make the last 2 minutes of each half a little longer. But I think competitively they should really consider it. In fantasy football, the worst thing in the world is when there's a minute and 52 left and the losing team has no timeouts and you get those 3 kneel downs to end the game. You know, it happens every year. You hear stories of
you're down by 5 points. All you need is your guy to get like 1 first down.
Yeah, you hear all these stories of, you know, guys losing their fantasy championships because their quarterback knelt down 3 times.
Yeah.
You know, the Super Bowl, I missed out on Patrick Mahomes' rushing yards prop bet because of those kneel downs at the end of the game, and we would not have saw those if the NFL had this comeback period. So, you know, as fantasy football players, we want every second of the game to produce fantasy points, and the league should look at it the same way. Keep people watching till the very end. We saw in the XFL how difficult it was for some of these teams to really put the game away, and how few games came down to, or how many games came down to the very last play. You know, not just because of the whole 9-point deficit still being a 1-possession game, but because teams had the chance with less than a minute to get the ball and score. You know, it puts added pressure on the teams that's leading to they need to really end the game and end the game with their foot on the gas and not just, you know, taking a kneel down and high-fiving their boys. How did you feel about the comeback period? I know there was points where it was definitely awkward seeing like a guy catch the ball and go out of bounds, or catch the ball and stay inbounds, and then all of a sudden the clock stops. But how did you feel about the comeback period?
Yeah, because that last part there where, you know, the clock stops for those 5 seconds, the first 5 seconds of the play clock, the game clock stops, and what that does is it keeps the playbook open, because normally, if you got the no timeouts, you got 1:30 left, and you just received the kickoff from you're on your own 20-yard line, let's say. It opens up your playbook, so now not every single play you see is some quick out route or some kind of corner route so they just get out of bounds. If you end up having to throw a check down to the running back and he's in the middle of the field, you just kiss your touchdown drive goodbye, basically, with all the time that's wasted there. And then all that results is the quarterback rushes up there real quick, and they spike the ball, and now we're sitting here waiting around for another 20, 30 seconds for the next play to happen. This keeps everything open. You can run your normal plays. It's just like it's a sped-up version of just a normal drive, and it's super exciting with all the pressure. You know, let's say it is an 8-point game. They just got to go down there and score. It's just more exciting. Every single rule, I always say the same thing over and over again. It's just more exciting. And the same thing going back to the overtime, although we never got to see it, I kind of compared it to college football overtime combined with hockey overtime with a shootout.
Right.
It would just be more exciting than, okay, you won the coin flip, you scored a touchdown, game over. Who wants that? No one wants that. Everyone's been asking for that to end for years.
Right.
The rules in the XFL almost completely perfect. Everything they did, just hats off to the XFL. I loved every single one of them.
Yeah, man, I really enjoyed the league. I enjoyed watching some names that we were familiar with. I enjoyed watching guys that I had never heard of make plays. It was a fun season while it lasted. I really hope that them needing to cut the season short by 5 games doesn't put them in a financial hole where they're not able to come back next year. Because it was definitely exciting, and I think it was legit football. It looked like professional football. It didn't look like some kind of gimmick league like the AAF did. So I really
don't say AAF around here.
Yeah,
it's like a curse word. Oh god.
I really hope they're able to come back next season. So. Hey man, I really appreciate you coming on the show. Hopefully we can do this again, maybe do some cross-pollination between the two shows and, maybe make some of our fans aware of one another. So again, thanks a lot for coming on the show, and hopefully you're staying safe and healthy up there in the New York area. Looking forward to the next time we're able to talk.
Absolutely, man. Appreciate you again for having me on.
And we're back. Let's check out some of these XFL players that deserve a shot in the NFL. So the NFL teams had the opportunity to sign XFL players starting Monday, March 23rd, but with the virus keeping guys from being able to go to team facilities, it might hurt these guys from having the chance to sign. It's been now 3 days, and so far the only offensive player to sign an NFL contract is P.J. Walker. There was a couple defensive guys that signed contracts, but this is fantasy football here. We're nobody's really running IDP leagues from the XFL, so let's focus on the offensive guys. P.J. Walker signs a 2-year deal with the Carolina Panthers. The Panthers also just signed free agent Teddy Bridgewater to a 3-year, $63 million contract, so it looks like Walker and Bridgewater will compete for the starting job. Cam Newton actually was cut today. He was released. Kyle Allen, who started 12 games for the Panthers last year, was traded to the Redskins for a 5th-round pick. So P.J. Walker, he played with the new head coach Matt Rule when they were together at Temple from 2013 to 2016. I still haven't seen how much the contract is worth, but I would not be surprised if we get into week 1 and P.J. Walker is the starting quarterback down there in Carolina. His former teammate Andrew Luck was a big fan of him, talking him up to his dad, Oliver Luck, who was the commissioner of the XFL, and he was by far the best quarterback in the XFL. He led the XFL in passing yards by almost 300 over the next guy, led in completions by almost 20 over the next guy, and in touchdowns with 15 in 5 games, like I said. Looking at the comparison of Walker and Bridgewater, so as far as TD percentage goes, Walker was better in college and in his one XFL season than Bridgewater has in his career. Bridgewater 3.6 touchdown percentage in his 5 games in the XFL. P.J. Walker had an 8.1 touchdown percentage, which is like Hall of Fame level. Obviously, he's not going to do that in the NFL, but you never know. Completion percentage, Bridgewater has a slight advantage. Yards per attempt, they're pretty much dead even. The interception rate, Walker in college did have a 3% interception rate, but only 2% in the XFL. Bridgewater at 2.3% from his career. So Walker actually looks like he's safer with the ball. And then you look at the rushing output. So Walker in his 5 games in the XFL had 99 rushing yards, 4.1 yards per attempt on his 24 attempts, and he did score that 1 touchdown. Looking at Bridgewater, 31 yards in his 5 games starting last year for the Saints, a career 1.1 yards per rush on 28 attempts. Not very good. So Walker, to me, he's got the advantage at more than one category here. So, like I said, I will not be surprised if we get into the season and he's the starting wide receiver. It's definitely going to be fun following this quarterback situation and the offense as a whole with Cam and Greg Olsen both not going to be there. So definitely pretty interesting stuff. Some more guys that I think deserve a shot. Cam Phillips, obviously, was by far and away the best player in the league. He led all pass catchers in every single receiving category. 44 targets, 31 receptions, 455 yards. He had the longest touchdown catch of the season with an 84-yard catch and run. And like I said, he had those 9 touchdowns, more than double the next highest touchdown scorer, and he was tied for first in yards per reception with 14.7. He had 9 catches of 15 yards or more. That's those explosive plays. To have 2 of those pretty much every game, that's Tyreek Hill level explosiveness. So there's too many teams in the NFL that could use a guy like this. The Ravens, Jets, Colts, Broncos, Raiders, Redskins, Vikings following that trade of Stephon Diggs, 49ers since they lost Emmanuel Sanders, and the Eagles with all their wide receiver issues they had last year. I think they could all use a legitimate playmaker like Cam Phillips. But the first team that comes to mind to me is the Green Bay Packers. They did just sign Devin Funchess today, being Wednesday. But I still think Green Bay has room for another wide receiver. Devontae Adams is one of the top 5 wide receivers in football, and the Packers made it to the NFC Championship game last year with a host of dudes at their wide receiver 2 and 3 spots, from Geronimo Allison and Marquez Valdez-Scantling in the beginning of the season to Alan Lazard and Jake Camaro toward the end of the season. Hell, even Jimmy Graham was the 3rd most targeted Packer last year behind Adams and Aaron Jones. Jimmy Graham now a Chicago Bear. The Packers have always been one of the more conservative teams when it comes to free agency, so it's not a big surprise to me that the only guy they've brought in so far is Devin Funchess. The XFL players can be had for pretty cheap too. I don't see them driving up a big bargain. I would assume you can get these guys on rookie contracts. Like I said, I think Cam Phillips to the Packers just makes too much sense. Next, Nelson Spruce got off to a great start in the XFL. First game had a 15-target, 11-reception, 103-yard game. He finished the season only playing 3 games, but amassed 24 targets, 256 yards. He played great. He showed the ability to both be a typical number 1 volume receiver and a deep threat. He bounced around between the Rams, Bears, Chiefs, Chargers, 2016 to 2018. The Rams have had Brandon Cooks on the trading block, and they're trying to save some money, trying to recoup some draft capital. So if they are to trade away Cooks, I think Nelson should be brought back to this Rams team, compete for that 4th wide receiver spot with Josh Reynolds. Josh Reynolds probably in line to take over that number 3 wide receiver spot if Brandon Cooks is to be traded, but the Rams offense went through some changes last year using their tight ends, Gerald Everett and Tyler Higbee, a lot more than we'd seen them use tight ends in the 2 previous seasons under Sean McVay. But we know that McVay loves that 11 personnel, and if Cooks gets traded, they're going to need a 3rd wide receiver to run those personnel groupings that they like. So I think they should really consider Spruce. We saw Todd Gurley on the sidelines of the LA Wildcats' first win in Week 3 when Gurley spoke very highly of Nelson Spruce. So I think he's somebody that we could easily see end up in the league somehow. Like I was saying earlier in the first segment, Donald Parham finished the shortened season with the 3rd most receiving yards in the league. He was tied for 5th in receptions and 2nd with his 4 TD catches. He was Dallas's top target and the focal point of that offense at 6'8" and only 240 pounds, though. He's still a little thin for his size compared to some other tight ends of this generation. Travis Kelce at 6'5", 260. Gronk is 6'6", was 268 in his playing days. Both are 2 to 3 inches shorter, but 20 to 30 pounds heavier. Maybe better comparisons might be O.J. Howard down in Tampa at 6'6", 251 pounds, and last year's PPR darling Darren Waller, who was also 6'6", 255. Both guys are 2 inches shorter, but 10 to 15 pounds heavier than Donald Parham. If he can bulk up a bit, I think there's plenty of teams that would love to have a guy with Parham's size and speed. The Falcons and the Colts are 2 teams that just lost their top tight end in free agency. Matt Ryan has been throwing touchdowns to tight ends his whole career, from Tony Gonzalez to Austin Hooper. And we all know how much Phillip Rivers loves to throw to his tight ends, a la Antonio Gates and Hunter Henry. Nick Holley, a converted running back. Holley was arguably the best slot receiver in the league through the first 5 weeks. He caught 21 of his 28 targets. That's a 75% completion, or a 75% catch rate. 266 yards and 2 touchdowns, one of them on a 50-yard run and catch. He looks like a poor man's Rex Burkhead. He made all kinds of great catches, one-handed catches, sideline catches. He had severe knee injuries in his 5 seasons at Kent State, where he played wide receiver, running back, and quarterback. He's got the versatility that teams love, and I know it's an extremely small sample size, but a 75% catch rate is pretty awesome. Here's 4 of the best slot receivers in the past 5 seasons or so. Jarvis Landry with a 65.8% catch rate, Julian Edelman 66.4%, Golden Tate 66.7%, and Cooper Kupp 69.3%. All of those are lower than Nick Holly's 75% catch rate. And then one last guy here, Jordan Tiamu. I think he's got a chance to at least compete for a backup spot. We saw him in the XFL running the zone read with Matt Jones and Christine Michael. All 3 guys finished in the top 9 in rushing yards in the XFL. Tiamu averaged 5.3 yards per rush on his 41 carries, averaged over 40 rushing yards per game, and he scored 1 touchdown. But he wasn't just a runner. He was 3rd in the league in passing yards and QB rating. He was 2nd in yards per attempt, and he had the highest completion percentage in the XFL. He showed he could read defenses with those RPOs and obviously that zone read. I think the team that makes the most sense is the Baltimore Ravens. When you run that type of offense that Baltimore runs, you got to have a backup that fits your system and all that, but someone that you would be okay with coming into a game, because you take such a huge risk of injury asking your quarterback to run the kind of offense that the Baltimore Ravens run. They're running like straight power O, pulling guards, designed QB carries. Unfortunately for Tiamu, the Ravens already have 3 quarterbacks on the roster, RG3 and 2019 rookie Trace McSorley, who they drafted in the 6th round last year, back up Lamar Jackson. Where did we go here? Okay, in 2020, it is the final season for RG3's contract with the Ravens, and they could save $2 million if they cut him. And if they can get Tiamu on a rookie contract, that would be, another 1.6 million to spend in free agency, which may not sound like a lot, but the Ravens clearly have a window here with Lamar Jackson. Not only is he way more at risk than any other quarterback because of the way he plays, but also on a rookie contract, teams with a starting quarterback on a rookie deal, let alone 3 of them, it gives a lot of flexibility with your salary cap. We've seen, just last year, this past season, Patrick Mahomes on a rookie deal. We saw the Seahawks make it to the Super Bowl 2 years with Russell Wilson on a rookie contract. So those deals are, if you can get a starting quarterback on a rookie deal, it is a huge advantage to you. So that's a couple players from the XFL that I really think the NFL should give an opportunity to. If they don't get signed through free agency, I won't be surprised if 1 or 2 of these guys gets picked up during training camp as somebody inevitably blows out an ACL or gets hurt somehow. Happens every year. We see it, unfortunately. So I'm pulling for these guys. Hopefully it happens. Quick little shout out to Dylan. Thanks again for joining us on the show. That was a lot of fun. Hopefully we can do it again. So make sure you tune in next week. Let me pull up the podcast schedule here so we can make sure we tell you guys what's coming up. So next week we're going to look at the AFC free agent recap. Go through all the AFC teams and see who did what in free agency and what teams are going to look different. Obviously, the Patriots are going to be on that list. So thanks again for tuning in, and as always, may the fantasy gods be cruel to your opponents.
You have been listening to the Kickin' or Stickin' Fantasy Football Podcast. For more great episodes and information, follow us on social media and tune in every week. Kickin' or Stickin' is available on Google Podcasts, iTunes, iHeartRadio, Spotify, Alexa, Reach.tv, or your favorite podcast service. Kickin' or Stickin' is a proud member of the HC Universal Network family of podcasts. To find out more about this and other great shows on our network, visit us online at hcuniversalnetwork.com today. Fantasy football is fun, but gambling addiction destroys lives. If you or someone you love suffers from gambling addiction, please do not be afraid to seek help. The National Council on Problem Gambling operates the National Problem Gambling Helpline Network. contact them today at 1-800-522-4700. Thank you for tuning in to the Kickin' or Stickin' Fantasy Football Podcast. Please remember to play responsibly and always look for your man downfield.